All right, so yesterday we, or not yesterday, Monday we had the talk with Stephen Greenwald, which I hope you all enjoyed because he gives you that insider look. I hope also that you got a sense of how complicated hegemony actually is, right? That involves a lot of different people. And I'm going to talk more about that today. So let me put up the PowerPoint slide so we can look. And we're going to talk more about Once Upon a Time in the West, because that's the real thing I want to share with you. I love that movie. Come on, it's really slow. Okay. First of all, I think one of the things to note, just to kind of go back, one of the things to know when we're talking about hegemony is that it's not so obvious. Just like it's not so obvious what the hegemonic ideology is, it's not so obvious what globalization is. So your textbook talks about 3 different versions of ideology. This is not actual globalization. Okay, just to be clear, there's globalization, which is the real phenomenon that's happening. What is that? I don't know. That's what everybody's trying to figure out. Okay, but then there's ideologies about what globalization is. The dominant ideology right now is market globalization, and we've talked about that. That's basically free trade, deregulation, integration of markets. The textbook just talked about integration of markets means, all the markets, there's not as much room to have alternative forms of markets. Integration of markets, standardization, basically capital, like stockbrokers can go into foreign countries, invest in what they want. This is supposed to, the idea here is that if stockbrokers from New York and London go into Ethiopia or Southeast Asia or wherever they go, that they're going to improve the economy there. Does that make sense? That's called foreign direct investment. That's their idea. However, the problem with this model, when foreign direct investment is not regulated and not controlled, is that, and this is what the neoliberals never understand, is that not only can stockbrokers go in, they can pull out. So what happened in 1997 is that you had all this investment in Southeast Asia, and then there was a bubble. Why is there a bubble? Partially because stockbrokers, have you ever met a stockbroker in downtown New York? Not very smart. They do a lot of cocaine and cigars and prostitutes and hookers. That's stockbrokers. Sorry, I'm really biased. But this is not all the stockbrokers. I'm exaggerating. There's a lot of people in downtown New York who are not exactly that smart. They're not very culturally aware, and they're not ethical. So they created a bubble economy. You have foreign direct, you have a bunch of dumbasses in New York and London. They see a good opportunity. They can't really think for themselves, so they just jump on a bandwagon. They invest a lot of money, and then there's a bubble, and then the bubble bursts, and then they pull out. And when they pull out, the economies of those countries shrink, and it's very devastating. So a lot of people say that market globalization is crap. I'm one of those people. So obviously I'm biased. I'm letting you know that I think this is crap. The thing about neoliberalism is that neoliberalism is practice of both Republicans and Democrats. It's not their rhetoric. It's what they do. It's not what George Bush and Obama say they're doing, but it's what they are doing. Then you have injustice. It's the alternative and ethical forms. This is the Occupy Wall Street movement is the kind of more extreme hippie version of it, but there's a lot of less obvious versions of this, including, for example, church organizations like Catholic Relief Services. Does anybody know CRS? They do this. Lutheran Social Services does this. Those are the Christian ones. But then there's a lot of other organizations that include environmental organizations, labor unions, who are basically arguing that we need to have a different sort of globalization that allows all people in the world to get together and figure out a better way. The justice model of globalization basically looks, this is when you get global civil society, and they're looking for alliances in other countries. So people in one country and people in two different countries will get together and say, here's some common problem that we can solve. So for example, we can get together and solve this health problem like the avian flu. Or we can get together and solve this environmental problem. Or we can get together and solve poverty or HIV/AIDS, right? So that's the justice model. Then you have the religious model, and this includes the jihadists. So you have Al-Qaeda, which is basically a response to the market globalization that uses religion as a kind of tool of uniting people all over the world. But it's not just the radical Islam, it's also radical Christianity that does the same thing. So you have radical Christians who, in the United States, who are not for the market globalization, they're not for the justice globalization, they're for a radical, like, Christian crusade that sounds like the 14th century, or sounds like the 13th century. Now, if you listen to political rhetoric, when you're listening to American politicians, a lot of times they will use the same slogans of religious rhetoric. So George Bush used a lot of crusade metaphor. He actually used the word crusade to talk about what he was doing. And you have a lot of politicians using justice rhetoric. So and George Bush did this too, especially with HIV/AIDS. He did a lot of good work on that. So you have both. The rhetoric is actually mixed, and this is my point, is that when we're talking about hegemony is actually a mixture of all these three things. Okay. We already talked about this, so I'm going to skip this part. Your media and your movies are part of a network of multinational corporations. So the artist has to, basically the point is, when you're talking about hegemony, you realize that the artist, the filmmaker, has to collaborate with the corporation. Yeah.
I don't think that situation means that Microsoft got fined $7 million for antitrust law violations.
Right. Because in Europe, they still have antitrust law. The United States used to have antitrust law until, now here's the example of neoliberalism as a hegemonic ideology. Both Reagan and Clinton. So it's not, a lot of Democrats will blame Reagan for this, because that's Democrat ideology. But Clinton did the same thing. He deregulated the FCC, which is why you have no good radio anymore. But Europe is still going to find these things. But however, what that ends up being is basically Europe, the EU, and the United States are basically competing for this stuff. So it ends up being the principles are there, but they just want control of the market. And that's the thing that the contradiction in neoliberal ideology is that the ideology of neoliberal economics is that it's free trade. But the reality of neoliberal economics is people trying to control it. Nobody actually, no company wants to give up control. They don't actually want free trade. So that's the ideology. Yeah.
You quickly say antitrust law. I don't know this.
Oh, antitrust. You guys can learn this in high school? They don't teach you anything in high school, do they? Sorry. Antitrust law. So antitrust law, a trust is when one company owns, is able to dominate, or you have monopoly, you have trust, right? So a monopoly is when one company dominates the whole market, right? A trust is when, and there's no competition. So we have, and increasingly, this is a problem in America too, that we have, everybody's merging. The Northwest and Delta are now the same company, everybody's merging. Now what you have, let me give you an example. A trust.
Like an oligopoly?
No, a trust is when a company owns all the different parts of production distribution. So let me go back. So look here, this is a trust. NBC, well, I guess NBC, Universal sold, or they sold this, but you have NBC, which is TV. You have Universal, which is movies. You have General Electric, which is light bulbs and fighter plane engines. And it's all one company, right? So that means that NBC, the news, is never going to say anything that's not in the interest of General Electric. And General Electric makes weapons. Does that make sense? ABC, is the news organization, is never going to talk about Walt Disney's sweatshops in foreign countries. That's a trust. So it's when the radio, and for example, like radio stations are actually monopolized by what's Clear Channel, like all of them. Viacom owns all this stuff, so there's not. What that means is that there's not enough competition and there's not room for other voices. It's very hard. Does that help you understand?
Yeah.
And there used to be laws against this. You used to be able to go to court and say, you can't own everything, because it's a conflict of interest. But in the 80s, Reagan just went, I don't care about that. I just like rich people. And Clinton basically did the same thing. Does that make sense? Okay. So the question I wanted to ask you guys was, I want to get to the movie though. How does the movie talk about this when we're talking about hegemony and all this stuff? First of all, I think what's really interesting to me when we're talking about hegemony is that it doesn't work that cleanly because you have, we're not going to be able to hear this, but you have Fistful of Dollars comes out, and it's a little different from John Wayne, right? This is just a trailer.
Oh.
And it's weird because this is a story, Fistful of Dollars is based on a Japanese samurai movie. So that's interesting. The plot. And what you can kind of see is that, even though you can't hear anything, is that it's not a good guy, bad guy movie. Right? In John Wayne, it's very clear you have good guys and bad guys. In Clint Eastwood's character, he's the hero, but you don't really see him as a good guy. He's not an anti-hero. It's just violent. And it's a lot of people struggling for money. You can kind of get a sense just of the style of it. The Good, the Bad, the Ugly is another one. Has anybody seen that? Which is basically about the Civil War. And at the end of the movie, you have three guys, and all of them are bad guys, and they're all going to shoot each other. And it's probably one of the most interesting movies about the Civil War you'll ever see, because you realize that the Civil War, which seemed to be just a movie about the North and the South, this movie shows you the important role of the West in the Civil War. I don't think most people think of the Civil War as a global war, like a world war. But think about the fact that the Civil War happened right after the United States took over northern part of Mexico. That was the issue. The issue was new territory. What are we going to do with this new territory? Who's going to control the new territory? That was the real issue of the Civil War. It wasn't slaves. That came later. So this movie shows you that. Very popular movie made by an Italian. So we have like really simple things that like the American public is bored by Westerns because they're stupid and simple. People are sick of John Wayne swaggering around. The Searchers is interesting because that's the first time we have John Wayne's character is actually revealed to be a psycho. Well, every other John Wayne movie, he's just a hero. Acts the exact same way. Same exact person, but his kind of craziness is not revealed. But Searchers is one of the very last of the John Wayne style westerns, like that. So yeah, but the thing that's also global is that this is a movie that actually involves transnational production. It has American and Italian studios working together. It was filmed in Spain, Italy, and the United States. The house scene, you know, the main character's house, John McBain's farm, that was in Spain. That whole thing, that's in Spain. And I think I told you that when he made Once Upon a Time in the West, he also made Once Upon a Time in America, which was about immigration. So it's interesting, too, to think of how the business works. The American-style Western is how he made money so that he could make the Once Upon a Time in America. That was the bargain that he struck with the American studios. They said, Fistful of Dollars, really popular, really low-budget movie. Fistful of Dollars is really low-budget. Totally popular, though. Americans loved it. And so the American studios were like, oh, we've been making these crappy Westerns for so long, and now this cheap Western comes along, and it actually makes more money. We don't need to like have these expensive productions with horses running around. Like Fistful of Dollars has almost no horses. So they loved it. So they gave Sergio Leone a bunch of money to make Once Upon a Time in the West, but he said, you also have to let me make Once Upon a Time in America, where I'm going to make a serious movie about immigration. Now here's the other thing that I think is important about both globalization and this film. It's about trains, right? I just want to emphasize, Once Upon a Time in the West is about trains. And I'm going to disagree with a lot of the stuff that some of you wrote in your things, that a lot of you thought it was about Jill McBain or about the main character in Once Upon a Time in the West is the train. Right? Everything revolves around the train. In that sense, but I want to show you a different movie. This is Iron Horse. Iron Horse is a train. About the building of the railroad that was made in 1924. This is by John Ford, the same director as The Searchers. So, who is the bad guy in the Iron Horse? You can already see it. Can you guess who the bad guy is in Iron Horse? Native Americans. So this is a very patriotic movie about the building of the railroad and the expansion of the United States. And the enemy is Native Americans who are hostile to this. Okay, we have the horses, we have the Native Americans on horseback running around. We have the Native Americans, because Native Americans wear full headdress when they fight. I'm just kidding, that's sarcasm. Anyway, but you have to mark them because we actually have white actors. The only way they can signify that they were Native Americans is by wearing those ridiculous headdresses, which of course Native Americans would never wear when you're in the middle of a battle. But anyway, you get the idea. That's basically the whole movie. So, dominant ideology of the United States in 1924. Yeah, I can't hear you, dude. Sorry.
Are you showing sort of the concept? Which I think is weird, sort of like the controversy.
Why didn't you say that before when I was teaching a moment about it? Here?
Yeah.
Oh.
And if you want to look up audio.
Okay. The thing is, like these kinds of things are working on it. So I don't know what to do. Okay. I'm just going to go back to it. So, okay, so you have Iron Horse, where the ideology is very clear. The enemy is the Native American. Now, in contrast, in Once Upon a Time in America, that's not the case, right? What's the big trick in Once Upon a Time in America is that Frank, who works for Mr. Morton, blames the Native American, but it's actually him who's doing it. Does that make sense? So clearly, Once Upon a Time in the West is doing a counter-hegemonic project, where the dominant mode of Westerns was cowboy versus Indian. Once Upon a Time in the West turns that and says maybe it's a more complicated situation that involves some deception. I want to show you how amazing this would be if you're watching the movie. Because Henry Fonda, the main actor, had only played these guys. I'm not going to show you these things. Henry Fonda was Frank. That's the whole thing. That's the whole thing. Yeah, exactly. Blue eyes, right? Because bad guys are supposed to have dark eyes. Okay, that's all sorts of racist crap, problematic right there. But before this movie, Henry Fonda had only played good guys. You all have probably seen 12 Angry Men, right? They just teach you that stupid No Child Left Behind test now. We're in so much trouble. Country's in trouble. 12 Angry Men is basically a movie about court. It's a trial, and the jury is deciding about the fate of a court case. Henry Fonda plays the hero, the voice of reason and moderation. Henry Fonda plays Abraham Lincoln, the young Mr. Lincoln. Let me show you There's Henry Fonda. Being Lincoln. You know, I'm just a good boy. Give it a speech. You guys can watch it yourself. Everybody's happy. Yay, Lincoln. And now let's watch the movie. No. Okay. So now we got the movie. We got the family in the wilderness. And by the way, unlike the searchers where the family's just in the wilderness and we have no idea why they're there, this movie actually explains how economic inflation is water. Railroad, right? The railroad is the most important character. So, notice how the camera pans around, okay? This is very important. We get the birds flying out. Got the close-up of her face. Eye line matched. Some of you noticed that. Boom! We have a sound. We don't know what it is. Right? This is awesome. Off-camera sound. I wish we could give it. The sound is so great, right? Because I think you notice, all of you notice the extra diegetic sound. Every character has a sound, right? So whenever a character showed up, his music played, or her music played, and the kid was in the game. He's going to die. Kid comes out. This is so great. And now you see what the kid sees, right? Horror. This is a horrible thing. The fact that the kid is coming out, the child comes out, makes the scene so tragic because you are seeing what he is seeing and you are experiencing what he is experiencing. This is a movie very stylistically playing with the conventions. Now, who's done it? We don't know. Now we have the long shot. The men come out. Of course, the movie is teasing us to find out who they are. The men come out. This is the boy is holding the. We still can't see them, but they're wearing the same coats that we saw in the beginning. See their feet. Now the camera shifts, and now we have the over-the-shoulder shot, right? So we have the over-the-shoulder shot. We're looking at the scene, and now this is the most important. This is the most amazing thing. Hands around, and it's Henry Fonda. It's Abraham Lincoln. And you see point of view shot, and you have his. This is what you were talking about, right? Yeah. The creepy blue eyes. Super blue eyes, every shot. Yeah. Henry Fonda was famous for his beautiful blue eyes in every shot, and of course, that's what Sergio Leone wanted to show you. So this is a complete reversal. That the bad guy is the guy who works for the train owner. And now, I want to show you what montage is. Here's montage. This scene was actually cut from the original American version cut this because Americans did a bunch of babies. He pulls out his gun. He shoots the boy. Now look what comes out of the gun. And he smiles because he's a creepy psychopath. Boom. And what comes out of the gun? A train. That's what we call a metaphor. Right? Because the real power of this movie is not the gun. The real power is the train in the Capitol. Does that make sense? So this is montage. This is classic montage, like I showed you the very first week with the steps of Odessa where the baby carriage is coming down, that I showed you with the eyeball and everything. This is European style montage. The other kind of montage that we talked about, which was continuity editing, showed time, passage of time. So like in Citizen Kane, to show that time had passed, you had that kind of montage. This is a conceptual montage that is creating a metaphorical relationship between violence, weapons, and power. Now, there's a lot of other great shots that I can go over. There's a lot of other things that I want to show you. For example, let's go to this one. Is the town, right? In the searchers, you just have the West, but you never really understood the economy. In Once Upon a Time in the West, you understand the economy. You understand the relationship between water. You understand all this stuff. Let's look at the town also. So here's the train, right? The train's coming. It's also a great segue. Moving forward. Jill McBain gets off. This is a beautiful shot. Oh, whoops, I went too far. Okay, so what's going to happen? She's waiting. We have the eye line match. Point of view shot. Time. We have the close-up on her face. Susie and Leon, he always has the great close-up. So you can see the economy again. In this movie, you actually have Black people and Native Americans and Chinese people, right? Because the West was actually a multi-ethnic place. In John Wayne movies, they were all white, except for the goofy Mexicans. But here, this is my favorite shot. Okay, so she walks in the building. Now you have deep focus, right? Looking through the window frames the shot. This is beautiful photography. This is why I love this movie. Even if you don't like the story, the photography is so beautiful. She goes out the door. And in the movie, the music's rising, right? It says, whoa, and the camera goes up, so the camera and the extra diegetic sound match. And boom! Never saw this in an American Western before. It's a town where people are actually doing things that people do. And notice that it's not finished. It's still being built. Okay? So, what is going on here hegemonically? Once Upon a Time in the West is totally reversing the ideology of the American Western. It's showing you the relationship between capitalism and violence. It's making that argument. The characters, Harmonica and Cheyenne, are they Native American? Are they Mexican? Are they white? What are they? We don't even know. We don't even know what they really are. Right? You're wondering, what's that? Because the real West was mixed anyway. So, the rhizomatic West. Questions about the West, its place, its genre. Is it American or global? So, when you're talking about a Western like this, you get a sense of transnational. Transnational, trans means across, but trans also means about. Trans is the Latin word. The Greek word is meta. Has anybody heard of meta? That's the same word as trans in Greek. So you're crossing borders. It's about the relation. Transnational is about the relations across borders. How is that different from global? Global is imagining the whole world as a single unit. That's global. So global capitalism basically makes the argument that the whole world is part of the same capitalist system. It's a desire for that to be true. Global religion is about the whole world becoming one religion. Multinational is different than transnational. How is multinational different from transnational? Multinational is when a single company or church or organization has bases in many different countries. So a multinational corporation like Toyota or General Electric, it doesn't just belong to one country. They have their home offices in several places. They may have their bank account somewhere else. So it's a top-down structure. But you might say, hey, but transnational is the same thing. Transnational is about people having relationships in both countries. The difference is that in transnational, you're not talking about a single top-down structure, right? That has bases in different places. You're talking about uneven, uncertain relationships that go from the bottom up. That's transnational. What about international? What about international? Well, international is when you have different national borders and they have to follow international law and that kind of thing, right? So you have a company in one country, and you have a company in another country. You have people in two different countries, and they relate to each other. Your nation has this culture, Japanese culture, American culture, Canadian culture, American businesses, Canadian businesses, Japanese businesses, and they have agreements. But it's international. The nation's national borders are respected. Transnational is when you say, like, actually, people are mixed up. They kind of move about. It's not so clear. So is Sergio Leone challenging the dominant ideology? I think so, because you don't get a sense of how things are actually working. He shows you this mystified relationship and all that. Now, what does rhizome mean? Okay, what is a rhizome? A rhizome is a concept that's talking about a way of analyzing culture. Think about your family tree. Family tree has, you've seen a family tree. So a tree, and you're like, so-and-so begat, so-and-so begat, so-and-so begat, so-and-so, right? Think about the Bible. Single direct line. From Adam to Abraham to Moses to Jesus. Somehow Jesus is related to Moses. It's not exactly clear how that happened in the Bible. The Ethiopian part of this line, by the way, is Sheba. And that's why the Ark of the Covenant is in Ethiopia. The Ark of the Covenant is in Ethiopia. Ethiopians believe that, and they actually tell you exactly which church has the Ark of the Covenant, the Ten Commandments. They can't show it to you. They don't show it to you, but they say it's right there. Now, that's hierarchical vertical tree, or a corporate model. Hierarchical vertical tree. When you're analyzing culture, you're basically saying, this is what Japanese culture is. And here's the family tree of this culture. It has many different branches, but it's all one root. This is my roots. Talk about people going back to their roots. That's the hierarchical vertical tree. The rhizome does the opposite. The rhizome is a non-hierarchical horizontal structure. The way I think about the rhizome is, you guys studied rhizomes when you were in biology class. What's a rhizome? What? Not a single root, right? It's like mold, like, right? Everything happens under the surface. There's this network of relations, and the little spores pop up. The way I like to think about a rhizome is, has anybody seen a mushroom ring in a woods? Is that a mushroom ring? So you have these little mushrooms that pop up. The mushrooms are the culture, I'm speaking symbolically, are the culture that you see. That's the visible form of the culture. But underneath all that is this, right? You kill the mushrooms, it doesn't matter, they just pop up. And they pop up in the ring. And you look at the grass underneath the rhizome, greener in the middle, right? Using the nitrogen and whatever. What's the point? Is there any single root in these structures? No, they just kind of merge around. So that's the non-hierarchical structure. Once Upon a Time in the West shows you this kind of web of relations. Talk about a web of social relations. A rhizome is like a web. So, what's the difference? Binary opposition would be the John Wayne movie, Native Americans versus white people. That's also the Iron Horse. In the rhizomatic West, we get a complicated web of relations. We don't even know the real identities of Cheyenne and Harmonica. Definitely, in Once Upon a Time in the West, it's clear that Morton is the bad guy, right? But when you're thinking, and Frank is the bad guy, but when you're thinking hegemonically, there's also a conflict between Morton and Frank. Morton needs Frank. Frank needs Morton. That makes power and the discussion of good versus evil a little bit more complicated. Harmonica, is he a good guy? No, he's just out for revenge. Cheyenne, is he a good guy? He's just trying to survive. Jill McBain, is she a good person? Former prostitute, now just trying to make her way. It's very complicated. Now, I want to actually disagree. I noticed a lot of people talked about Jill McBain's character, talking about gender relationships. And several of you made the argument that this movie shows the sexism, right? Because Jill McBain is abused and raped. I don't think some of you understood that. I think some of you thought that when Frank and Jill McBain were having sex, you thought that Jill McBain wanted to do that or was convinced to have sex with him. That's what we call rape. She was forced. She was doing it because she had to. She had no choice. Either she had sex with Frank or she died. She hated it. That's why she comes back. That's why she's glad that Frank gets killed at the end. She can't wait for Frank to get killed. Now, that makes the gender thing a little bit more complicated. So 19th century, harmonica. You have that scene where he's able to force her, right? He's violent towards her, but then he doesn't do anything. It's weird, right? That scene is totally weird. It's totally confusing, right? Suddenly harmonica is just like, ha! And then he stops. Who's the only person that survives? Everyone else is dead or gone. She owns the farm, she controls the train station. Some of you thought that this movie showed sexism, and that's true. You see violence towards women. You see rape. You see 19th century structures where either the woman is a prostitute or a homemaker, right? Or a wife. That's all true. But then at the end of the movie, she's the only one still standing. She's the one who owns the train station.
It's like not the movie though, she's standing in all those imaginary necessarily rape her. girl should, he could have. I would say just because of people who raped, but
it showed that he had that power. Now, how do we look at that movie, though? Is the movie agreeing with that? Because when you think about the reality of human relationships, and you're talking about the United States today or back then, rape happens all the time. So should the movie not show that? Does that make it more feminist by not showing violence? Would you feel better if they sat down to tea and had a nice civil conversation? Would you feel better? Would you feel better if Jill McBain fought back and won?
I thought she put in Cheyenne, and I'm so happy. Like, I'm not even so happy. And then I realized she got shot. Seriously, she couldn't have at least gotten her way.
Why would she want to poison shot?
Yeah, he's like, just take it. You need to just let this happen.
After she gave him coffee.
And he said, like, do you know what they deserve it.
The movie, I agree, the movie totally does. And you get to see the movie. Just like, Seth MacFarlane said. So the movie is very sexist in that way. But on the other hand, it would be totally unrealistic if Harmonica and Jill McBain fought back and beat Harmonica in that scene, right? He's a trained killer. You can have your fantasy, but this movie is exploring like a lot of the troubles exploring the West. Everybody just doing what they can to survive. And the reality of the West, if you actually study the West, is that it was an extremely violent and horrible place for women. Women were on, the death rate for women was really high. You actually know statistics. A lot of women were on drugs because they were the way they could. And people have done studies of this. It's really violent. And so I think if the movie did not show that, and did the John Wayne thing, where you have these virtuous women just like smiling, and the only danger to them is in America, that would be stupid. But yeah, I agree with you that this movie is totally like this. Sergio Leone, he's a creepy old man, and actually, random thing. Remember when she gets off the train? Sergio Leone wanted to have the camera like look at the actress basically is like that. On the one hand, I mean, I'm not just responding to you, by the way, because you agree about Kennedy, is that this movie shows this kind of sexist binary or sexist kind of thing. And I think it does. But I think the movie also troubles that, and it troubles that because of like the way Harmonica, that's just weird, right? That's just weird. And the movie troubles that because she's the only one that's still alive at the end. Does that make sense? So there's a different kind of sense of, in terms of hierarchical power, we have hierarchical power, but in terms of this movie, we have a non-hierarchical system of relationships, where it's not really clear who's going to end up surviving. And when you're talking about the West, and we're talking about the genocide of Native Americans, we're talking about the use of violence in order to make money for people in New York. Sometimes it's not just about principles, it's about surviving. And that's what this movie is about. So notice that it's not going to be like this nice, like, working class struggle where the working class overthrow the important and everybody's happy at the end, right? It's not going to give you that either. So from a class perspective, from a Native American perspective, the Native Americans would probably have the same reaction that you did about women. They'd be like, yeah, the Indian's still dead. Sure. Working class people would be like, yeah, the working class people are still on the railroad. So it doesn't, you don't get what you want. And I think that's what makes it a good movie. Because you're bothered by it. Does that make sense? You're bothered by it. I was bothered by those lines too. You know, it's like that's. I was bothered by Cheyenne getting shot at the end. I was bothered by Harmonica just remaining for no reason. It didn't make sense to me. There's things about the movie that don't make sense. Or it doesn't give you what you want. What else did I want to talk about? Okay, coming back to hegemony. And why hegemony is never clear. I want to just think about the relationship between Mr. Frank and Mr. Morton. Mr. Morton needs Frank, Frank needs Mr. Morton, but they don't have the same agenda, they don't have the same goals, they don't have the same way of doing things, they don't have the same beliefs. But they need each other. Frank is a psychopath, killer, rapist, asshole. Mr. Morton just wants to make a lot of money. He wants to control the railroad. They need each other. And it's that collaboration that is awkward, strange, unclear. That is the way power really works. You know, when you watch other kinds of movies, you have people in power, people not in power. You have good guys versus bad guys, and it's very clear. It's very simple. When you hear politicians speak, politicians talk in terms of good guys and bad guys. It's very clear. Hegemony is a way of talking about power that shows you that the relations, the collaborations, the entanglement, the deals, the bargains that people make is not so one-sided. If it's not one-sided, if it's not that relationship, the relations of power is not binary, master-slave, good guy, bad guy, cowboy, Indian. If it's not binary, it's much more complicated. Then we start to see what we can do for real instead of what we just do in our fantasies. Does that make sense? That's what we're talking about here. And this is another way of thinking about hegemony that are increasingly people are talking about hegemony in terms of these rhizome of relations, network of relations, underground, subterranean network of relations, all sorts of collaboration. So that's basically my argument, that I think the Western genre as a genre shows all right, that's all I have to say. I wanted to show you the clips, but you know, they're all on the PowerPoint slides, so you can just go check them out. Anything else I wanted to see? So, let me go back. Does anybody have any questions for me? Courtney, yes, you just. Anybody have any other thoughts? Any other ideas about the movie? Let me ask you this. What did you, I'm going to turn this off now.